Hello, welcome back to the class. We just finished the background of Ghana and the coming of the gospel to Ghana. Now we continue the contextual missions in Ghana. We reviewed the research paper of Nicole Ahrens. So we just finished the backgrounds and the coming of the gospel in Ghana. Now we are going to see the theories and the cultural missions, the contextual missions. First of all, she deals with the terms. The first term she deals is enculturations. Enculturations. The term enculturations was coined by J.M. Herskovits and is the process of learning from infancy till death. The process of learning culture from infancy to till death. The meaning is, as we born as a baby, we born into this world without culture and custom, but from our babyhood, we learned and we came to know and we are acquainted and we adopted the culture till we died. This is called enculturations. Enculturations. Enculturation can also refers to the process of learning and allowing one's culture to become a point of reference and basic for all interpretations of realities. And enculturation takes place when a person is inserted, usually from birth, into a culture and the culture becomes their own. Enculturation is similar to the process of socialization, the educations of an individual by society. Every human is responsible for learning a culture. Most of the process is informal and is taught through the individuals adapting to society's rule. The image and symbols of society are didactic and allow for the individuals to create his or her own categories. This process allows one to understand experience in context of one's culture. The individual adapt to a culture's symbol and concepts. The term enculturations does not fully encompass the depths of the process of one faith, tradition, being inserted into a new or different cultures. The way enculturations is able to is to some extent highlight number of the issues but doesn't fully encompass them all. Enculturations is the process of an individual being inserted into culture, whereas enculturation is the process of inserting a faith tradition into a culture where it doesn't currently exist. Therefore, the term enculturations will work better than enculturations for the times of these studies. So number 2, let's see acculturation. Acculturation is social science term referring to the meeting of two cultures and challenges that arise from these meetings. That when the gospel or the culture of the gospel is introduced to the local culture, there are some outcomes, both negative and positive outcomes. The third term is adaptations or accommodation. This term is very crucial in the study of contextual missions. Usually the term is used in contextualizations. So it means the meeting of predominantly Western Christianity with another culture was known as adaptations or accommodations. These words would be used interchangeably and were the most predominantly used terms in the field. Adaptation or accommodations dealt with the impact missions had on developing countries. So this mainly deals with how the Christian or the gospel has effects or impacts upon the local cultures, how the Christian gospel transformed the local culture. These terms focus on how the Christian gospel or Christianity has impacts upon the local culture. The fourth term is contextualizations. Contextualizations, the terms I prefer most, but this author, the author of this research, chose to use the term enculturations. But enculturations and contextualizations are very close. But as I explained, contextualization in a sense is broader because it forecasts the whole context of the community or the local people. The context include cultural context and religious context, educational context, personal context, behavioral context, includes all the context of the people. But enculturations has the specific focus on the culture. So this is the only difference. Contextualization is focused on the context of the interactions rather than the culture. It looks at specific cases and how theology is applied, direct instances and context. It focuses on a particular situation in which the gospel must be contextualized rather than looking at the culture as a whole, seeing how the local culture and the church interact with each other. So the other term is indigenization. The term indigenous means to be native or to a particular land or to be born a particular culture. Therefore, the phrase indigenizations of Christianity is used when people native to a culture or land begin to articulate the message from their cultural perspective. The native people begin to guide and to lead, but the local churches does not cut its links with the universal church. The problem faced by the times indigenization is that the term is too constrictive in that focus on the culture of contact, not recognizing that the group that brought the message transported and is through the culture. The insider knows the host culture very well but is unable to recognize the changes that have taken place within their culture. This happens because they are living within the culture and are unable to distinguish or recognize the changes occurring. The last term is inculturations. Inculturation is the process in which the faith embodied in one culture encounters another culture and become embodied in it. It is a dialogue between faith and culture. Inculturations is the missiological process in which the gospel is rooted in a particular culture and later is transformed by its introductions to Christianity. Both Christianity and culture are enriched by this process. Inculturations is used for theological purpose. In another definitions by Corlius, the inculturations of the church is the integrations of the Christian experience of the local church into the culture of its people, in such a way that the experience not only expresses itself in elements of this culture, but becomes a force that animates, orients, and inculcates the culture so as to create a new unity and communion, not only within the culture in questions, but also as enrichment of the church universal. So this is actually interpretations of the church, the culture of the gospel and the local culture is very clear. It is the work of integrations between the culture of the gospel and the culture of the local people. So this is what we did in contextualization. In contextualization also, we integrate the word of God, the message of the gospel appropriately to the local cultures. So this is the same thing we can see in inculturations. Inculturations, the main task of inculturation is to integrate the culture of the gospel into the local culture. So now we will deal with the issues in contextual missions of Cana. What are the issues? The first issue is witchcraft. And number two is libation. Libation is pouring out a drink for prayer. And number three is healings. Number three is dealing with health or healing. And number four is ancestor worship. So we are going to deal with these four issues: witchcraft and libations and dealing with health or healings and ancestral worship. So in doing contextualizations in Ghana especially, we can confront with these four issues. First of all, let's see libation. For one to fully understand Africa, one must comprehend African religions. When examining African culture, one can see that religions is the foundation. In African traditions, religions is the life and the life is the religions. Traditionally, religions was a way of life, thereby making cultures and religions inseparable. Religion gives significance to the members of the community's life and is incorporated into all aspects of life, including fishing, eating, traveling, and farming. African Christians are still influenced by their traditional practice and religions. Even though devoted Christians are very much faithful to the gospel teachings, some Christians are still under the influence of the practice and the beliefs of tradition religions, under the influence of the practice and the belief of traditional religion. When libation, ancestral worship, or other traditional practices were brought to the surface, many Christians or chief of the village are still participant in this practice. So this is the issue we can see. Traditional, I can believe that ancestors or departed relatives are in the stage of spiritual existence. The spiritual state of ancestor affect traditional death rites, which include sacrifice and libation. For many African societies, libation and sacrifices are the main modes of interaction between ancestors and the living. This practice involve bilateral obligations. The relatives needs the ancestors for their powers, whereas the ancestor needs the living relatives to ensure that they will be able to reborn in the children of their lineage. Libations are usually performed with fresh water and millet flour mixed with water and mallet, beer, and palms wine. Each of the elements of the libation result in reaction by the ancestors. The water is poured on the altar first as a gesture of affection and is then followed by the mallet, which rises to the surface, symbolizing the swelling and discussions by the ancestor. The result in pushing the ancestor into action. The mallet, bear, and palms wine are stimulants which excite the ancestors. The rings result in the ancestors losing control and adhering to the wishes of the living. This is the final stage of libation before the animal sacrifice would be performed. So libation, we can see the practice of libations. It is pouring out prayer and drink. It is also the act of connecting with the dead ancestors by believing that the powers of the ancestors are protecting the families, the living relatives. So this is the belief behind this practice. If the Christians are still influenced by this practice, how can we deal with these issues? This is all about contextual studies and contextual missions. So we have to decide ourselves. As Ghanaians, you have to decide yourself whether to reject this practice, this influence, to separate it from Christian practice, or to still involve in this practice. We have to decide it. Actually, all these issues, witchcraft, libation, ancestor worship, dealing with health or healings, all these issues are related to each other. After becoming Christians, even though we don't believe anymore on witchcraft and sacrifice for health and libations, ancestor worship, but sometimes Christians, they can face life practical issues or problems. In that time, they are really tempted to do in their old way. In their old way means in their old belief, in their old practice. Dealing with all these issues, let us see the comments and the final conclusions of Nicholas Ahrens. Here she concludes her research paper like this. I found that I found that themes began to arise while interviewing and observing such healings and witchcraft curses and defense against the evil spirit. It became clear that Christianity has been used in place of traditional practices for protection against the spiritual world. When praying each night, the pastor would call upon God to protect and keep his members. They pray Fridays for protections of all the members against the plans of evils, specifically against any spirits entering into us while we were sleeping. Before we travel from one location to another, we pray for a safe journey and against any plans of the devils to harm us. When we arrive safely, we thank God for his protections. Travel in Ghana is dangerous and a safe return is not granted. Therefore, God is called upon to help with the uncertainty and anxiety. Prayer serves as the source of protection. Most tragedies and some illness are attributed to the devils. Therefore, one must ask Jesus for protections. African Christian is still influenced by African traditional religions and practice, yet people are quick to distinguish themselves from traditional practice. Despite the fact that Bambatha Christians are quick to deny any influence of African traditional religions, it was evident to me as the observer to see the influence of African culture on their Christian practice. Despite the fact that Bambatha Christians are quick to deny the influence of African traditional religions and practice, it was evident to me as an observer to see the influence of African culture on the Christian practice and belief. Christianity was not initially inculturated. Christianity were moved to the Salem, which was a segregated living community. Christians were taught the importance of living as followers of Jesus Christ. That means giving up many traditional practices because they conflicted with the teaching of Jesus Christ. Throughout the years, many traditional practices have been incorporated into religious tradition. The concept of evil is defined in terms of the devils, but is still understood in African culture as witchcraft. Healing is another important point, which was originally the role of traditional priest and healer. This role in Bambatha is now filled on the pastor. Chief Muslims and other community even came to the pastor for prayer, for healings and recovering from the controls of evil spirit. Although prayer has been adapted as Christian practice, many of the prayers such as deliverance prayer are derived from traditional African concepts which have been developed into a Christian forms. With the absence of the chief, who is currently residing outside the township, the pastor has come to fulfill some of the chief role. The traditional ruler typically mediate feuds within families and help to mediate conflict amongst community members. The pastor has become one of the key leaders in the community. Therefore, his respected status allows his decision to carry weight in the community. When I was residing in the mission house, there was at least one family feud settled by the pastors. Mystical language of the Christian scripture has aligned well with the worldviews of the Bambatha Christians. The passage that many Christians take as allegorical can easily be understood literally in the village of Bambatha. It is very important for the people of Bambatha to demonstrate pure from the Christianity, especially to their white sister. A pure form of Christianity, however, does not exist because culture is always embedded in religions. The pure form of Christianity the people of Bambatha were referring to was the Western Christianity brought by missionaries. I found it unnecessary that the cultural traditions were abandoned due to the fact that they did not appear to be in alignment with the pure form of Christianity handed down. Bambatha has the unique history in the form of the onset Ghanaians. Ghanaians have been preaching the gospel, but But this did not completely allow for the gospel to be inculturated. The first preacher was still educated and instructed by foreigner who did not completely understand and embrace the culture. This day, African traditional religions are still present because African religions and culture are so tightly interwoven, but many traditions have been abandoned because they are seen as pagans. Even though many interviewers quickly deny the presence of the pagan practice, these practices have still influenced African Christian worldviews and worship experience. The European missionaries were unable to recognize that their religion was embedded into their distinctive culture. Therefore, they were unable to accommodate such practice as libations, ancestor worships, and witchcraft and healings. This practice were never given the opportunity to be in dialogue with Christianity. So, as we read her conclusion, we can see that the pastor played a key role in society. Before becoming Christians, the priest or the chief of the village was taking responsibility for sacrifice and worships, libations, and healing for the village. But after becoming the Christian, still the pastor is responsible to pray for the people and to the community and to protect from the evils and dangers and harms, to pray to God. So even though they have a new belief, a new faith in Christianity, that all practices and beliefs are still influencers in the Christian community. Actually, the research paper is an open-ended because the author of this research didn't give final solution for how to deal with all these practice and all the influence of their old culture and practice, how to deal with the influence of their old culture and practice. So this is an open endings. We have to think and decide how to contextualize the gospel in these cultures, and it's very important to receive the wisdom of God and to receive discernment of God and to be able to identify the Christian, to identify the integrity of the gospel and also the identity, the African culture identity. It is very important to identify the integrity of the gospel. At the same time, it is very important to values the identity of African culture. So we need to be wisely think how to inculturate or how to contextualize the gospel in this culture. Sometimes it's very difficult to decide whether to reject or accept because Christians are tempted to go back to the old practice when they face with practical problems in life. For example, if a family lost their cow or their oxen in the forest, they were looking for these domestic animals for few days and they cannot find out. Finally, if they go to the pastors, if the pastors pray for them, the pastor cannot tell exactly where the cow is or where the ox is. But in that case, Christians are tempted to go to the witchcraft or the fortune tellers or somebody else. So that they can tell exactly where the cow is. Because I also was grown and brought up in a similar society. I know a family who lost their cows, their oxen, and they searched for a week, 2 weeks, but finally they could not find out their cow, and finally they went to the fortune teller or the witchcraft, and then they give few money, and the fortune teller tell the exact place where the cow is, and they found out. I saw with my eyes, so this sometimes is miracle. But when we look in a spiritual eyes, it is not surprising because the evil spirit also knows everything. But Satan cannot do only one thing. That is, he cannot destroy our soul or he cannot save our soul. But he can destroy our life and he can give us a lot of troubles in our life. So Satan also knows a lot of things. So when the witchcraft or When the fortune teller connected with the evil spirit can tell the place where the cow is. So in that case, Christians are tempted to go to the fortune tellers or the witchcraft sometimes. Not only the witchcraft and the fortune tellers, but like false prophets also is a problem. Christians, when they do business, they want to ask advice from prophets, so they invite prophet to pray in their house. The prophets will demand some money to offer him, and he will pray and he will predict, he will prophesy that their business will be successful. So people want to hear such kind of prophecies. So people are following after the false prophets. That also is one of the issues in contextualization. So how we will contextualize the gospel biblically, that is very important. It's very important that we need to identify the integrity of the gospel in one hand. In another hand, we have to value our culture and traditions. We have to recognize our traditional value and cultural values. So we are catch between these tensions. But contextualization or inculturations attempts to fix out these problems biblically. So we need to think of all these issues and bring out the best way for contextualizations. So this is your task. Think of, and after listening this video, what is your suggestion? Write about this is your task. How you will contextualize the gospel in the social cultural belief of the local people effectively and biblically. This should be your task. So now we have been discussing contextual mission in Ghana, and I'm not well acquainted with the Ghanaians' cultures and problems and issues, but only I just present the research paper of Nicole Ahrens. I just present the research paper of Nicole Ahrens. So I believe from this listening this video and through these issues, you got some ideas and you learned some lessons. In next class, we are going to discuss contextual missions in other African countries. We stop our class here now, and God bless you all. See you in next class. Thank you.